I think it's pretty apparent how much I love video games. I love my PS4, I love my Xbox One, and I love my Wii U. All fantastic consoles. But not all great consoles and handhelds go recognized as great consoles right away. You sort of have to look back at them and sort of appreciate them for what they were. Sometimes these consoles were just ahead of their time or weren't executed properly. And that's why today I'm going to be listing my top 5 most underrated consoles as well as handhelds of all time. The Wii U is the newest console on this list, and it was released about a year before the PlayStation 4 and the Xbox One. Yes, it's slightly more powerful than the PS3 and the 360, but it's also much more closer to the 360 and the PS3 in terms of power than compared to the Xbox One and the PS4. Now the Wii U is a great console. It had a ton of first-party support and a lot of indie game support. Games like Mario Kart 8 were a lot of fun, and I keep switching back to playing Smash Bros. Wii U and Splatoon from time to time. And Splatoon came out in May, and I'm still playing this now in August. It's a lot of fun, and it goes to show what polish Nintendo has with their console. But with that said, the lacking third-party support is the big problem with the Wii U. Because the Wii U is so significantly underpowered compared to the PS4 and the Xbox One, which has become the standard nowadays, it seems that the Wii U is just gonna keep lacking third-party support because it's more of a gamble for developers to make this extra effort to bring their game over to the Wii U. Bringing your game over to the Wii U is sort of complicated and more of a gamble because there aren't many people that own a Wii U compared to the standard or current generation of consoles. And with that said, not many people that own a Wii U buy these third-party games right now because it's just not the audience for those games. Let's say Call of Duty Black Ops 3 came out for the Wii U, PS4, and the Xbox One. How many copies do you expect this game to sell on the Wii U? Probably not very many because this game isn't really meant for that generic audience. People on Nintendo have always wanted their first-party games, and they've always gone to some other manufacturer, let's say Microsoft or Sony, for their third-party games. And so there's not much of a reason for these developers to bring their games over to the Nintendo platform because not many people will buy them, in the essence that it will actually bring a profit to the developer. And it's because it's lacking third-party support that the Wii U ultimately became sort of a failure in this current generation. And even though it is technically a failure, it's actually a really great console. I think a lot of people go and treat it badly, even though it's actually a fantastic console. It has a lot of first-party support, some great indie games, and those first-party games are some of the best games of this year and last year, even comparing them to the Xbox One and the PS4. The Sega Dreamcast was a fantastic console that just sort of came out around the wrong time. Sega was trying to win back its fans with the release of the Sega Saturn, which ultimately crippled a bunch of fans with the surprise announcement that it was out the day they announced it. And so the Sega Dreamcast was supposed to win back all those fans and sort of convince everybody, hey, Sega is the place to be. And well, the time for that release wasn't the greatest. Piracy plagued the Dreamcast from the get-go. It was really easy for someone to just download an ISO and burn it onto a CD and pop it into their Dreamcast. It was as simple as that. Nothing stopping people from pirating their games. And that was a big hurt for the Dreamcast. It made developers not really want to bring their games over to the console because ultimately it could mean that everyone else could just pirate it for free. With that said, the Dreamcast had a lot of great games. It had Sonic Adventure 1, Sonic Adventure 2, two fantastic Sonic games that brought Sonic into the 3D era for the first official time. And besides the Sonic Adventure series, there was a lot of great titles released for the Dreamcast. Games like Crazy Taxi and Jet Set Radio were fantastic experiences on this console. And even with the plague of the piracy, it probably could have survived if it wasn't for the release of the PlayStation 2. And this is where the whole bad timing came out. Sony had already won a bunch of gamers with the original PlayStation, and the announcement and release of the PlayStation 2 was ultimately the nail in the coffin for the Dreamcast. It's really a sad tale because the Dreamcast wasn't that much of a bad console. It was a really great console. It could play CDs, it had a lot of fantastic games, and even had online support for video games with Windows CE. It was ahead of its time, but because of the release of the PlayStation 2, it ultimately had a very short life. The Nintendo GameCube was one of my favorite game consoles of all time. I had so many great experiences playing games like Super Smash Bros. Melee, Super Mario Sunshine, Twilight Princess, and Kirby's Air Ride. But sadly, it wasn't a commercial success. For some strange reason, Nintendo decided to go with the mini DVD option instead of the standard DVD option with the GameCube. This ultimately put a restriction on game developers. Let me explain. The mini DVDs could only fit a max of 1.5 gigabytes compared to the PS2 and the Xbox. The standard DVD could hold 4.7 gigabytes, or if it was a dual layer DVD, it could hold up to 8.5 gigabytes. A lot more space than the GameCube. This meant that third-party games that took up a lot of memory could not physically be ported over to the GameCube without having to be restricted of certain elements in the game. This ultimately hurt the GameCube a lot because it meant that not many third-party games were ported over to the GameCube that were already on Xbox and PlayStation 2. It's a really sad thing to see because ironically the GameCube was actually one of the more powerful consoles on the market at that time. It had the most powerful CPU compared to the PS2 and the original Xbox, but because of that lacking DVD drive, it sort of limited the console. Some people would also argue that maybe the design of the console looking like a lunchbox and more child-friendly also hurt the sales of the GameCube. That's something I personally don't really agree with. I think it's more of the third-party support. The PlayStation Vita is possibly the best hardware design for any gaming handheld out there. Sony really nailed the design of this thing, and personally I think it's the best designed handheld of all time. Right before the PlayStation Vita was released, we were promised console-like experiences on the go with our PlayStation Vita, and we got that at launch with games like Uncharted Golden Abyss and Gravity Rush. But with that said, nowadays in the present time, we haven't really got a single thing from Sony themselves. First-party support on the PlayStation Vita is practically dead at this point, and so is third-party support outside of JRPGs. The only thing powering the Vita now is indie games. And currently in 2015, we live in an age where many people or gamers look down upon indie games just because they're lower priced games and not from AAA developers. And I think that's completely wrong. The Vita is a great console. It has a lot of great JRPGs, it had a lot of great first-party support at launch that you should go back and play. And there's a lot of great indie games that just feel much better on the PlayStation Vita than they do on PC or any other handheld. The Vita is a fantastic console and personally my personal favorite design handheld of all time, but it's sort of lackluster to see not much support for this thing, and so that's why I think it's one of the most underrated handhelds of all time. It had the potential to be such a great handheld and possibly kill the 3DS, but for some strange reason it didn't. Nowadays you could probably buy a PlayStation Vita used online for about $100, or you can get a brand new PlayStation TV, which is sort of like a TV connected PlayStation Vita, for as low as $40. It's a really sad thing to see something as great as the PlayStation Vita slowly fall apart in recent years and really be trickled down to only JRPGs and indie games. Not saying that's a bad thing, but this thing deserves a lot more than that. The Sega Game Gear was Sega's answer to the popularity of the original Nintendo Game Boy. It was a fantastic console that had a lot of great experiences, and technically speaking, it was actually better than the Game Boy. The Sega Game Gear had a color display as well as 8-bit graphics, much better than the Game Boy. But with that said, it was the design flaws of the Game Gear that ultimately made it die. The Sega Game Gear had a lot of great games come to it, most of them being Sega Master System games ported over to the Game Gear. Games like Sonic the Hedgehog, Mortal Kombat 2, and Columns were all available on the Game Gear. Fantastic experiences on the go. But with that said, it was the design flaws of the Game Gear that really did destroy it. Although the Sega Game Gear was technically more powerful than the Game Boy, it had to take 6 AA batteries that only lasted 5 hours compared to the 30 hours on the Game Boy that only took 4 AA batteries. And even though the Sega Game Gear had a color display, it was only 3 inches and it made it very hard to see the games we wanted to play on our Game Gear. There was a lot of great games to play on this thing, they just weren't really executed properly. And that does it for my list of the top 5 most underrated consoles and handhelds of all time. Let me know your personal list in the comment section below. I'd love to hear it. If you enjoyed my video and want to support my channel, please consider giving it a like and sharing it with your friends, as it really helps my channel grow. Here are 2 new videos I recently released, one of them being on the history of the beta of Splatoon, as well as the top 5 indie games I think are great on the Nintendo 3DS. If you want to keep up to date with me off of YouTube, you can check out my Facebook and Twitter links in the description below. Thank you all very much for watching this video, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.